All the animals in the park went silent at the same time last night. Now they're all staring south. Welcome to the Wilderness Protocol. We study animal behavior to understand the health of an ecosystem. We listen to the chorus of the wild, the bugle of an elk, the howl of a wolf, the chatter of 1,000 birds at dawn, and we interpret it as a sign of life, of balance. We have protocols for what it means when that chorus changes. But there is no protocol for what it means when the chorus stops. All at once. My name is Dr. Alana Velez. I am a wildlife biologist specializing in bioacoustics. My job is to listen to the sounds of the wilderness. For the past 6 months, I have been stationed at a remote research outpost in the heart of the Denali National Park Preserve. Last night, at 2:13 a.m., every animal in the 6-million-acre park went silent. And now, as the sun rises on a world without a single birdsong, they are all, every one of them, standing perfectly still. And they are all staring south. This is my field report on what I believe is not a phenomenon but a prelude. My research station is a small solar-powered cabin nestled in a deep, unnamed valley in the heart of the Denali wilderness. It's a lonely place, but I have never felt alone. The valley is a crucible of life, a constant, vibrant symphony of sound. My work consists of monitoring a network of highly sensitive microphones placed throughout the valley, recording and analyzing the soundscape of the ecosystem. I listen to the conversations of wolves, the territorial calls of eagles, the subsonic rumbles of grizzly bears. I am an eavesdropper on the oldest conversation on Earth. For 6 months, the rhythm of my life has been dictated by the rhythm of the valley. The explosion of the dawn chorus as the birds greet the sun. The lazy hum of insects in the midday heat. The distant, lonely howl of a wolf pack as the stars begin to appear. It is a predictable, beautiful, and living clockwork. Last night, the clock broke. I was awake, as I often am, in the early hours of the morning, monitoring a live feed from a microphone near a known wolf den. The alpha female had just given birth, and I was documenting the first, soft whimpers and calls between her and the pups. The sound was scientifically valuable and on a personal level, profoundly moving. At precisely 2:13 a.m. Alaska Standard Time, the whimpering stopped. Mid-whimper. It wasn't a fade. It was a cut, like a sound engineer had hit the mute button. At the same instant, the sound from every other microphone in my network went dead. The chirping of the crickets, the hoot of a great horned owl I had been tracking, the gentle rustle of a moose moving through the willows, all of it gone. I stared at my console. The waveforms on my screen, which seconds before had been a chaotic, vibrant scribble of life, were now perfectly, terrifyingly flat. All 24 microphones, scattered over a 50-square-mile area, had gone silent at the exact same millisecond. My first thought was a system-wide power failure. A solar flare, perhaps, that had fried my equipment. I ran a diagnostic. All systems were green. The microphones were active, the connections were stable. There was simply no sound to record. A profound, unnatural silence had fallen over the entire valley. It was not the quiet of a peaceful night. It was the quiet of a held breath. The quiet of a world waiting for an axe to fall. I went to the cabin's small, reinforced window and looked out. The moon was a sharp, silver crescent, casting a cold, pale light on the landscape. The valley was still, beautiful, and looked exactly as it should. But the feeling was all wrong. It felt like a photograph of a forest, a perfect replica with the soul stripped out of it. I stood there for an hour listening to the silence. It was the most terrifying sound I have ever heard. The silence held for the rest of the night. I did not sleep. I just sat at my console, watching the flat lines on my monitors, feeling like the last conscious being in a dead world. As the first, weak light of dawn began to creep over the eastern peaks, the silence was finally broken. But it was not the sound I was expecting. It was not the joyful, chaotic explosion of the dawn chorus. It was a single, low, and mournful moan. It came from a large bull moose that I could see standing in the meadow below my cabin. He was standing perfectly still, his massive head raised. And he was staring south. He moaned again, a sound of deep, primal unease. And then he fell silent again. As the light grew stronger, I began to see them. The other animals. They were emerging from the woods, from their dens, from their nests. A herd of caribou on the far ridge. A grizzly bear, a massive, powerful creature, standing on the bank of the creek. A snowshoe hare, frozen in place by a patch of willows. They were not eating. They were not hunting. They were not interacting. They were all just standing. And they were all, without exception, facing south. I grabbed my high-powered binoculars and scanned the valley. It was a living tableau of silent, fearful reverence. A flock of ptarmigan birds that are never still were perched motionless on a rock outcropping, their heads all cocked in the same direction. The wolf pack, which should have been in its den, was out in the open, the alpha male and female standing side by side with their new pups, all of them staring, unblinking, to the south. It was the most unnatural and most terrifying sight of my career. The predator and the prey, the massive and the small, all standing together in a shared, silent and fearful vigil. They were not looking at anything I could see. There was nothing to the south but more mountains, more tundra, more of the same vast, empty wilderness. But they saw something, or they sensed something, something so powerful, so fundamental, that it had overridden every instinct for survival, for hunger, for procreation. Something that had silenced an entire ecosystem and turned every living creature into a compass needle, all pointing to a single, unseen, and terrifying true north. I tried to use my satellite phone to call the main research station in Fairbanks. The phone was dead. Not just no signal. No power. The battery was fully charged, but the device was a lifeless brick. I tried the long-range radio. Only a soft hissing static answered my calls. I was alone. The animals were my only companions, and they were lost in a trance I couldn't comprehend. I spent the day documenting what I was seeing, my hands shaking as I wrote in my logbook. My scientific mind was scrambling to find an explanation. A subsonic frequency broadcast from beneath the earth that was affecting the animals' inner ears? A sudden massive shift in the planet's magnetic field? I went back to the data from the night before, analyzing the exact moment the silence fell. And I found it. Just before the 2:13 a.m. cutoff, my most sensitive microphone had recorded a single, faint, and deeply anomalous sound. It was a pulse. A single incredibly low-frequency pulse, lasting just over 3 seconds. It was a sound that was more of a vibration, a pressure wave that I had not consciously heard, but that had clearly been felt by every living creature in the valley. And the sound had come from the south. As the day wore on, the animals' behavior grew stranger. They began to prepare. The grizzly bear began to dig. Not a shallow den for hibernation, but a deep, frantic burrow, throwing massive claws full of dirt and rock into the air. The caribou herd began to move, not to graze, but to huddle together in a tight, defensive circle on the most sheltered side of the ridge. The wolves abandoned their den and began to herd their pups towards a deep, narrow cave at the base of the mountain. They were not preparing for a storm. They were not preparing for a predator. They were preparing for an event that my human senses, my vaunted intelligence, my advanced technology could not perceive. But that every nerve, every instinct in their wild bodies was screaming at them was coming. As evening approached, a new element was added to the silent, fearful tableau. A man appeared. He was walking up the valley from the south, a lone figure in the vast landscape. I watched him through my binoculars. He was an old man, a native Athabascan from his dress, leaning heavily on a walking stick. He moved with the slow, deliberate purpose. He did not seem surprised by the silent, watching animals. He walked past the grizzly, past the caribou, and they did not react to him. It was as if he was a part of the same strange, silent ceremony. He walked to the very center of the valley, to a place where a small, clear stream bubbled up from the ground. He knelt beside the spring. He took a small, leather pouch from his belt, and he began to sing. It was not a song I had ever heard. It was a low, guttural, and deeply mournful chant. It was a song of immense age and immense sorrow. And as he sang, the animals reacted. The bear stopped digging. The caribou lowered their heads. The wolves let out a single, low, and heartbreaking howl. They were all listening. They were all participating in his ritual. And then I realized what he was doing. He was not welcoming something. He was not praying to it. He was appeasing it. He was performing a ritual of surrender. An ancient protocol to placate a god that he knew was coming. The old man's chanting continued as the sun began to set, his low, mournful voice the only sound in the otherwise silent valley. It was a sound that seemed to be absorbed by the earth itself, a prayer offered to the very bedrock of the world. I watched him through my binoculars, a knot of cold, intellectual fear tightening in my chest. I was a biologist, a woman of data and observable phenomena. And I was watching a scene that felt like it had been torn from the pages of a mythological text. As the last sliver of the sun disappeared behind the western peaks, the old man fell silent. He stood up slowly, his ancient joints creaking, and he looked up at the southern sky. And all the animals in perfect silent unison did the same. The wolf pack, the caribou herd, the lone massive grizzly bear. They all lifted their heads and stared, unblinking, at the same patch of darkening sky to the south. My hands trembling, I went to my own powerful telescope, the one I used for observing nesting eagles on the high cliffs. I swung it around and pointed it south, following their collective silent gaze. At first I saw nothing, just the familiar early evening stars beginning to appear in the deep indigo. But I knew they were not looking at the stars. They were looking at something beyond them, or something in front of them. I fine-tuned the focus, and then I saw it. It was not a star. It was not a planet. It was a shape. A patch of the sky, high in the southern hemisphere, that was subtly, but perceptibly, darker than the space around it. It was a hole in the veil of the night. A moving, shifting, and utterly black shape, like a cloud of cosmic dust, or a vast, celestial creature, that was blocking out the starlight behind it. And it was growing. I watched, my breath held for over an hour. The shape expanded slowly, patiently, like a drop of black ink spreading on a sheet of blue paper. It was not an astronomical object on a predictable path. It was a living darkness, and it was approaching. My mind raced through the possibilities. A swarm of unknown, non-reflective micrometeorites? A cloud of interstellar gas? But none of those explanations accounted for the reaction of the animals. They were not just seeing it. They were feeling it. They were reacting to a threat that was not just physical but fundamental. It was then that my satellite phone, which had been a dead brick all day, suddenly chirped to life. I almost screamed. I scrambled for it. A single, new text message had appeared on the screen. The sender was listed as unknown. The signal strength was at maximum. The message contained a single line of text. "Stop watching. You are attracting its gaze." I dropped the phone as if it were burning. Who had sent that? The Park Service? A government agency? Or something else? Was this a warning? Or a threat? I looked back at the telescope. The dark shape in the southern sky was still there, still growing. Stop watching. The command was impossible. I was a scientist. My entire life was dedicated to observation. To not watch, to not know was a form of death. Against every instinct for self-preservation, I looked into the eyepiece again. And the darkness looked back. I cannot describe what I saw. It was not a physical object. It was a presence. For a split second, the patch of absolute blackness seemed to focus. And I felt a gaze upon me. A cold, ancient, and utterly alien intelligence. It was a feeling of being seen, of being known, of being categorized by a mind so vast and so different that my own consciousness felt like a single, terrified cell under a microscope. I screamed and stumbled back from the telescope, my heart hammering, a wave of vertigo and nausea washing over me. The connection was broken, but the feeling lingered. The feeling of having been noticed. Down in the valley, the old man had fallen to his knees. He was no longer chanting. He was just kneeling in the grass, his head bowed, in an attitude of complete and total submission. The animals remained still, their silent southern vigil unbroken. The night deepened. The darkness in the sky grew until it had consumed a full quarter of the southern hemisphere. It was a slow, silent, and inexorable invasion. And then the light began. It was not a single light source. It was a network. From within the heart of the celestial darkness, faint, geometric patterns of a pale, sickly green light began to appear. They pulsed in a slow, rhythmic, and complex sequence. It was a language of light. A silent cosmic conversation. Or declaration. I had the horrifying realization that the darkness was not a creature itself. It was a vessel, a ship, a carrier, and it was preparing to release its cargo. I spent the rest of the night torn between the terrifying eyepiece of the telescope and the dead silence of my radio equipment. I tried again and again to send a signal out to warn somebody, anybody. But there was only static. The world outside my small, isolated valley had ceased to exist. As the first false dawn began to light the eastern sky, the phenomenon reached its climax. The green geometric lights within the darkness pulsed one final time, in perfect silent unison. And then from the center of the darkness, a single thin and impossibly long filament of that same green light descended. It was not a beam of energy. It looked organic, like a tendril. A cosmic fishing line being slowly lowered through the atmosphere. It descended for what felt like an eternity, its target the vast, ice-covered peak of Mount Denali itself. It touched the summit of the mountain with a silent, brilliant flash of green light. For a moment, nothing happened. The mountain stood, silent and majestic. And then the entire mountain began to glow. A soft, green, bioluminescent light spread from the summit downwards, flowing through the rock, illuminating every crack and crevice. The mountain, the very bedrock of the continent, had become a part of a new, alien, and terrifyingly vast circuit. Down in the valley, the animals all let out a single, unified sound. It was not a sound of fear. It was a sound of resignation. A chorus of moans and whimpers and cries that acknowledged the final, terrible truth. The hunter had found a new feeding ground. And the old man, still kneeling in the center of the valley, just looked up at the glowing mountain, and he wept. The glowing of the mountain subsided as the real sun rose, its familiar golden light washing over the valley and making the world seem normal again. But it was a fragile, superficial normality. The great darkness in the southern sky was gone, as if it had never been. The animals were moving again. But their behavior was wrong. The grizzly bear was not foraging. It was sitting on the creek bank, methodically stacking stones into a small, neat pile. The caribou were not grazing. They were walking in a slow, endless, perfect circle. The wolves were not in their den. They were chasing their own tails in a frantic, silent dance. Their minds, their instincts, their very being had been rewritten. They were no longer the wild, unpredictable creatures of the forest. They were the components of a new alien ecosystem. They were the gardeners, the keepers, the subjects of a new, silent, and invisible master. And the old man was gone. There was no sign of him. He had simply vanished with the dawn. I knew I had to leave. My research was over. My world was over. I packed a single bag, taking only my data drives and my logbook. I abandoned the multi-million-dollar research station to the silence. The hike out was a journey through a world I no longer recognized. The forest was the same, but the life within it was now a twisted parody. I saw squirrels chasing each other in perfect, geometric spirals up the trunks of trees. I saw a flock of birds flying in a tight, pulsating formation that resembled the lights I had seen in the sky. Nature was being reprogrammed. And I was a ghost, a relic of the old world, walking through the first day of the new one. I was found 2 days later by a park ranger at the edge of the preserve. I was dehydrated, incoherent, and suffering from what they called severe psychological shock. I tried to tell them what I had seen. The silence. The animals. The darkness in the sky. The glowing mountain. They listened with patient, pitying smiles. They showed me the satellite data. There had been no atmospheric anomalies. They showed me the seismic reports. There had been no tremors. They showed me the recordings from the other bioacoustic stations in the park. There had been no great silence. According to the official record, according to the data, nothing had happened. My experience, my terror, my truth had been confined to my small, isolated valley. A pocket of reality where the rules had been temporarily suspended. A private, silent, and localized apocalypse. They relieved me of my post, of course. They cited stress, isolation, and burnout. They were kind about it. They gave me a generous pension. They thanked me for my service. I live in the city now. I try not to look at the sky too much. I surround myself with the loud, chaotic, and beautifully predictable noise of humanity. But sometimes on clear nights when the city is quiet, I look up. And I can almost see it. A patch of stars in the southern sky that seems just a little bit darker than it should be. And I know that what I saw was not an end. It was a beginning. It was a seeding. A planting. The hunter, the entity, whatever it was, it did not invade. It integrated. It rewrote the protocol of the wilderness. I am the only one who remembers the old world. The world before the silence. And I am submitting this report to the protocol, not as a warning of something that is coming, but as a record of something that has already arrived. The wilderness is no longer ours. We are just living in it, for now blissfully unaware that the garden is under new management, and that the gardeners are no longer of this earth. Thank you for completing this field report from the Wilderness Protocol. We draw our maps and our boundaries, believing we understand the world, but we only see the surface. The deepest protocols are not written by us, and we are not the ones they are designed to protect. We are merely the background noise. And sometimes the silence that follows is the truest warning of all. If this record has served its purpose, please consider liking this video and subscribing for further documentation of the changing world. Look to the animals. They will always know the truth before we do.